Sathiya Sam, what's going on, man? It's good to have you on. That kind of rhymed. Now I'm thinking about it, it's good to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure, man. I This is a good topic to discuss. Actually, one that we've been talking about actually in the community a lot more. Very, very open about it.
Good.
But I'd love to just hear your story. Let's start with your family. What does your family look like now?
Yeah, so I'm one of three kids. Grew up in immigrants' home. So my parents are Canadian immigrants. They're both born and raised in India, more or less. My mom in Malaysia, but she's of Indian background, if that makes sense. And my dad was a pastor, so I grew up kind of in standard pastor's home, Christian education, all that good stuff, man. So that's a little bit of my family background. I'm currently married. My wife and I don't have any kids yet. We're just practicing for now, but we'll get there eventually. But that's a little bit of the lay of the land. Is that what you meant as far as family?
Hey, that was good, man. And yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even ask about the practicing part, but now you gave everybody a visual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we went there.
It's so funny, man. Like when people say like when you talk about kids, we're like, we don't have kids now, we're trying. It's like this code of like, yeah, we're actively having a lot of sex.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like there's only one way to interpret that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. We're trying. Like, so very cool, man. So how did you get involved in this type of work?
Yeah, I don't think it's any mystery. People who are in this kind of line of work usually have a story of their own, and I am sadly not an exception. So I got exposed to pornography in the computer lab of my Christian school. I was 11 years old, and that was in 2001. So it just goes to show you that, sure, technology has created some problems, but this was a problem long before smartphones and all that stuff. And for me, like, it's actually, I'm glad you asked about my family because that's important context here. Like, Indian families. So in Indian culture, you don't talk about this stuff at all. Pastor's home, and historically, I mean, maybe your listeners would have different experiences, but the church has not been great about addressing issues of sexuality and really creating safe environments to have conversations around it. And so for me, I just lived with a lot of shame. When I first got exposed, it was by accident. I was an innocent kid, but it still created a lot of shame, and I had nowhere to turn. So, just a thousand questions and zero answers, and really not even any clue on how to get those answers if I really wanted them. So that's where everything started for me. It developed into a much worse habit in high school, but it was also kind of normalized by my peers. So I would say I had a conviction about it, kind of knew it was wrong and that I probably shouldn't be doing it, but also told myself, like, whatever, I'm 16 years old. I'm figuring out my sexuality. I'm sure I can stop when I need to. And then in university, that was really the crux of it. That was where I would say I was properly hooked, like planned my days around it. It impacted my ability to just show up in relationships, even to show up academically a little bit, not tons, but it was starting to kind of have a widespread effect in my life. And that's also where I decided to get some help, and that's kind of what began my recovery journey, which we can get into. But that's sort of how the whole issue started.
I mean, I don't blame you, man. In college, like I would have rather done that than college algebra. So
Yeah.
I can see where
Yeah.
I can see where that temptation would win. Um, I'm curious though. I want to go back to when you were first exposed to this. What were your what were your initial thoughts? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I have a 9 year old. I also have a 15, 16 year old and a 7 year old. But I'm sitting here thinking, I just started the conversation with my 9 year old
Yep.
about his our boy parts, right, and all this other stuff. But I know that like few of his friends already. I mean, dude, we're talking third grade. Few of his friends already have phones, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like phones at third grade? But there's
Yeah.
kids in second and first grade who have phones, so it's only a matter of time before I'm sure he sees it. And the reason I think that's a good place to start with context is because I want to get inside the mind of like an 11-year-old or a 10-year-old, and like the first time they see this, like, what what did I just see, and what am I supposed to do with this information?
Yeah, for sure. Like for me, because I had no sex talk growing up. There was no talk about technology. That wasn't really a thing in 2001 anyway. But I was just shocked, and I was horrified actually. There was very little part of me that was actually intrigued by what I saw. Definitely a tiny bit. But I was coming in so green and so innocent. I almost didn't even understand what I was looking at.
Yeah.
And it was a very innocent sounding website. My classmate was like, "Hey, my buddy said go check out this website." I think he already knew what it was, but he was sort of playing it off like he didn't. And I just remember like trying to find the power button for the screen as quickly as possible. Like, it just like I did not want to be affiliated with this stuff. I knew it was bad, and we were like, get rid of it. So that was the initial response for me. I think when parents do ask, they're like, what can we learn from your story, or how can we do things differently? Uh, Again, I'm not a parent, so I don't try to pretend that I really understand that arena. But the people that I look up to that I will certainly be modeling when I have kids of my own are the ones who, number one, are having the conversations early. So it's great that you're being intentional about it. And then number two, they tell their kids, "Hey, this stuff is out there." They tell them what it is before they see it, and they have a little course of action of like, when you do see it, you're not going to be in any trouble, but just let dad know, just let mom know. And I think those were things that were missing from my story that probably could have helped a little bit.
Interesting. Okay. I I always am so curious around the part of like, hey, come and tell dad, right? Because that's what we call creating an environment of psychological safety.
Right.
That's more of an academic term, but I think the audience has really gotten used to me using that term because it's basically what it is it's an environment that doesn't have blame, shame, pain, or guilt, right?
Mm,
You're like, oh, what's wrong with you? Why did you do something like that? We don't look at that, and that kind of thing. And
yeah.
there's all this shame, right, that's associated with that. But in our other interactions that we might have with our kids, we get angry with them. There's disciplinary action and all this other stuff. We might be sending a message, even if it's not on that subject, that,
Yes.
hey, man, I'm not the safest dude in the world for you to come and tell these things, even if we say over and over again, hey, when you see this, you can come and talk to me. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious. I want to just get your perspective on that when it comes to just our kids. What do you think is the best way we can keep that conversation, number one, going and our kids feel comfortable about it? But when they do look at it, they feel like we're the safe person to come to.
Yeah, so I mean, I would reverse engineer this a little bit. In its simplest form, porn addiction is an intimacy disorder. The reason that grown men struggle with sexual misbehavior of any kind, let alone an addiction to pornography, is typically because of relationship dysfunction, unmet emotional needs, and the inability to cope with stress, in addition to like trauma and some of the maybe more obvious causes. But those are some of the kind of basic categories. So what creates an environment where a child is positioned to have a healthy sexual life? Well, they are able to get their emotional needs met in a healthy way. They have healthy relationships, which is not the same as conflict-free relationships, right? But it's a healthy relationship, so that when there's tension, when there's discord, there's repair, right? It's rupture and repair. And then the third element is that they learn how to navigate the cares of life. They're not completely sheltered. They get exposed to stress levels that are appropriate for their age, and they're guided on how to actually handle it and how to cope appropriately. So I think a parent does their job well when they're able to facilitate these processes appropriately, obviously, depending on the age. But that's if you can do that on a regular basis, you're definitely going to create an environment not just of psychological safety, but you will brand yourself as a safe person. Because if a child has an unmet emotional need, they will come to you and they will test that out. Can dad actually handle my emotions? Is he going to be able to actually be a valuable resource in my time of need? Mom and dad or mom and son are in discord. Is mom able to repair the relationship? Like, these are all things that subconsciously we monitor to dictate whether or not somebody is actually safe. And so those are the three things that I think matter the most, not only for psychological safety and not even just to brand yourself as a safe person, but actually to position your child that when they become an adult, they're going to be able to cope with the cares of life, navigate the regular relationships, and manage themselves in a way that doesn't require compulsive or any kind of addictive behavior to something as toxic as pornography.
Mm, that's really good. You said a lot there. I want to go back to something that I jotted down here, and that is help guide them so they can cope and handle their experiences. So, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard a podcast guest talk about how we can guide and help our kids cope. But
Mm,
I even look back, I look at your experience of how you stumbled upon porn. My experience with porn was similar but different. I was 9 and I was staying at a relative's house. And this relative, overnight one night, my mom was out and about, and this relative popped in a VHS tape and just thought it was a joke, thought it was funny. He just wanted to see my reaction.
Jeez.
He just was like, he did it like in humor, like not to be like a sicko or anything like that. He just popped it and he was like, and I think he was probably either drunk or high at the time, probably. But he popped it in, and I looked at the TV, and he looked at me, and he immediately just started dying laughing. He thought my reaction was the funniest thing ever, and I was like, what are they doing?
Right.
I'll never forget it, man. I know it sounds kind of vulgar. So listen, if for those of you guys who I know you listen to my podcast in the car with your kids, I'm just going to give you a quick warning here. You have some time. Hit the pause button if you want to, or hit the 15-second skip ahead right here, because I'm going to say something here, but I think it's appropriate for our conversation. Okay, so there, they got warning. I'll never forget the image. The movie popped on as this woman giving a guy a blowjob, and I didn't even know what a blowjob was. And
Right.
she did this thing where she did the reverse cowboy, and I was like, oh my god! It was only like a matter of probably 3 or 4 minutes that I was watching this, but I was like, what am I watching here?
Yeah.
And I was just like, what do I remember that night, like, what did I see? What's going on? I probably should never tell my mom. She's gonna freak out. And,
Right.
but the thing was, is it for me, that was a launching pad where I struggled with it, in my life, because
Yeah.
it freaked me out, but it also intrigued me at the same time,
Yes.
where I became more curious about it. And you're the first person that I've ever heard use the word cope, because I think at that age, at 9 years old, and I've got a 9-year old now, I
Yeah.
needed someone to help me just understand, what in God's name did I just see, and what do I do with this information now? So
Yeah.
when you say cope, can you give a little bit more detail around that?
Yeah, for sure. It's probably the most useful to explain it in contrast to trauma. So, trauma is the inability to integrate an experience. And I know that your audience is very familiar with the concept. But, trauma is kind of that overwhelm. It's like there's too much input for what I'm able to handle, and something becomes traumatizing. And when you experience trauma, you're unable to effectively cope because essentially the stimulus or the input from the situation is beyond your capacity. So healthy coping is when we either are able to exercise our capacity to compute, to process, and to somehow integrate what we are experiencing, or we are imparted capacity. And this is where the parents come into play. So, a 9-year-old boy has a limited capacity for what he can cope with and what he can handle in life. And sometimes he's going to be exposed, hopefully a majority of the time, he's only exposed to things that are within his realm of coping capacity. But if he does experience something that is beyond his capacity, that's where a parent is able to impart something. They can ask the right questions, they can provide perspective, maybe they can find the right resources that he or she may need to cope. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about coping. It's just learning to basically navigate the cares of life. And in a perfect situation, our kids are always coping, and we're just able to encourage them and guide them along the way. But sometimes the parents do actually need to impart a little bit of their capacity, if I can put it that way, so that they're able to manage.
Mm, wow. Where were you like 30 years ago? That would really help me out. Um, Very, very cool. Okay. So what were the first steps in your healing process that you had to take? I would imagine. So you were in college, was that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
So that's for a college student, that's a big that's a big moment of courage, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So okay, the important context here is, like I said, I grew up in the church. I was very active in the church. I actually always have enjoyed church, and to this day, faith is a huge part of my life. There, for people who did grow up in a faith-based home, whether it's Christianity or otherwise, typically what happens is, so you grow up and you do the traditions, you go to church, you do whatever, because that's what you do, right? And sure, like if the parents do a good job, they explain why you do things, and there's a certain enjoyment to it, hopefully, if it's done well. But somewhere along the way, You become an adult, and then you get to decide whether you believe what they believe, whether you want to adopt those things. And I went through a soul searching period in university. My intent was to become a psychiatrist. I lost a bunch of friends to suicide in high school, and so I had a fascination with mental health, and that was kind of where I wanted to make my contribution to society. And in the middle of my degree is where I would say I really took ownership of my own faith. And because I had grown up in church, I sort of knew that when you made this commitment, there came some changes to your lifestyle if you really wanted to live according to the example of Christ and the teachings of the Bible. So for me, it meant like I had to drink more responsibly, or maybe not drink at all. I had to clean up my language, and I had to stop watching porn. Those were like the behavioral components that I had in my head with this decision. The first two were no problem, maybe a week or two, and it was like, I could snap into it. But all I was told about pornography was, hey, if you want to stop, you install an internet filter on your device and then try to talk to somebody about it. Try to talk to your loved one, if you have one, or a pastor or whatever. And so I did install the internet filter, but I had nobody that I could think of that I could really talk to about this. And I was just drowning in shame, like the fear of coming out about my struggle the thought was debilitating because it was like they're going to see me differently. I'm going to lose my friends. What if my parents find out? Like I just had all these fears. They were grossly exacerbated in my mind, but they were legitimate at the same time. You don't know what's going to happen. And I just reached a breaking point. That was honestly how it all came about, because it was like I was so sick of struggling alone. And I was starting to build, you talk about psychological safety. I was starting to build a relationship with a buddy of mine from university, and we played Halo together like a couple times a week. And we'd have a beer, we'd play a bit of Halo, and you just start talking about life. And it kind of organically came up one day. And guys are so funny, right? Like, because we'll sometimes we'll poke around a subject just to like we throw a feeler out there because we know we really need to talk about it, but we'll see how they react. And so I did that. I remember bringing up something like, I don't know. It was like, yeah, man. And, like just trying to live like a sexually clean life is just so difficult, like something that's like kind of blanketed. But he asked the right questions and made me feel safe enough to open up about it. And that's where everything kind of started for me. And it was super liberating. I was pleasantly surprised to find out he didn't reject me. He didn't hate me. He didn't judge me. And he was actually like, hey, yeah, I struggle too. I totally get it. And that was sort of the beginning of my recovery process. But it took me a while to even muster up the courage to reach that point.
I think that's probably one of the I think that's one of the biggest trickeries about porn is like, well, it's not crack. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm passed out and drinking myself to death or smoking weed every day or like, and like I've had I've had some guys that we've had talks about it, like we talk very openly about it in the alliance. Like, I mean, it's like an everyday thing. Like and
Yeah.
the cool thing is when you bring it out in the open, you remove the shame. Like
Yes.
when the more you keep it tighter and secret, the more power that vice has over you.
Yeah.
And so we talk about it, but one of the things that I mean, this is humorous, is adding some humor to it. They're like, well, if I'm looking at porn and taking care of myself, it's like less on my wife. I don't want to like overwhelm her so much with my needs. So if I take care of myself, then I'm giving her a break.
Yeah.
It's like it's just funny how we kind of like justify it from time to time. And obviously, I'm trying to add some light to it because it is such a shame cycle for men.
Yeah.
Um, I really want to get into. So first of all, let me recap the vulnerability thing with you before we go down that road. By you saying out loud, I I have this going on, and I want to be better about it. I think the really cool thing about that whole situation is that you get the opportunity to say something out loud, remove the shame cycle from it, and then ask
Yeah.
for help. Which, by the way, I don't know about you, but when you do that, or when we do that as human beings, suddenly we feel lighter. It's almost
Yeah.
like, man, I feel like 70% of the work is kind of done. I said it out loud, and I'm ready to move forward and get the help I need. It's almost like it feels better right away with
Oh,
that.
oh, it does for sure. And I think what people don't realize is when you're alone, it's a very dark place. Like
Yeah.
there's no way out, right? And that's why it becomes so debilitating. So I think when people do actually open up, it's just like you have hope again, and that's what the human heart needs to have any kind of functionality or quality in its life. Like there needs to be some hope of a good future, a better future, and some improvement from a situation like that.
I agree. I want to get into the brain, and what is actually happening in the brain.
Yeah.
And many people say that it's like, well, porn rewires the brain, and it does this, it desensitizes you, it does all these things. What do you know about that?
Okay, so there's probably two different branches that would be worth talking about for your audience. So the first is that porn is what they call a supernormal stimulus. This is the research term for it. And what they mean is that the level of stimulation that a typical porn video provides you is unnaturally high. And this was best demonstrated in an experiment. They did this with a bunch of butterflies, actually. So this guy made a bunch of cardboard cutouts of butterflies, and then he painted them really bright colors, really eye-catching kind of designs. And then he made a little mechanism so he could give them like a fluttering movement. There was like a little device that he'd move up and down, and they would flutter. So they looked like real butterflies. They're painted unusually bright colors, very beautiful designs. You could not ignore them if you wanted to. And so he released there's a room of these cardboard cutout butterflies. He released a group of male butterflies. So what do? Well, of course, they see the attractive female looking butterflies, quote unquote. So they try to mate with them and they realize they're cardboard and whatever, not a big deal. Then he inserted a group of female butterflies to see which ones would the males prefer. And despite there being real butterflies in there, real female butterflies, the male butterflies still preferred the cardboard cutouts. So these are butterflies, they're not humans, but it illustrates a concept here, which is that when you watch pornography, something that is incredibly stimulating above what is normal, the thresholds for your brain to experience arousal get raised. They get raised to the standard or the level of stimulation that pornography provides. So this poses a couple different problems. The first is that on just simply on an arousal level, real sex, real sexual connection is no longer as stimulating or perhaps not stimulating at all. And so sexual intimacy really starts to suffer this is especially for guys who are married, you're in some sort of long-term committed relationship, it really becomes a problem. The rates of erectile dysfunction have never been higher in younger men as well. And we don't know exactly why. And this is where research falls short in this area because we don't have a control group because pretty much everybody's been exposed to pornography, right? So it's hard to compare and say, oh, when for guys who don't watch porn in this day and age, here's what it looks like. And for guys who do, here's what it looks like because most guys are watching porn or have been exposed to porn. So you have to take the research with a grain of salt in that regard. There could be higher stress levels and other things to account for some of it, but personally I would have to guess that at least 50% of that increase is probably just from pornography, so much so that there's actually a diagnosable condition called porn-induced erectile dysfunction. So in your brain, this would be the first thing that is a real problem, is the threshold for normal levels of arousal in your typical man are being raised to unnatural levels that unfortunately your partner simply cannot compete with. Does that make sense? That first part that I've explained?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. So let me give the second one quickly, and then you can ask a follow up. So the other part of it is the reward centers of the brain, and everyone talks about dopamine. I think the world has a pretty good understanding of what dopamine at least represents. But here's the thing that people really need to understand: dopamine is not about the acquisition of pleasure; it is about the pursuit of pleasure. So, in other words,
Okay.
basically the neurological basis of addiction is you are not addicted to the alcohol, you're not addicted to the drug, you're not addicted to the pornography, you're addicted to what's next. It's the next hit, it's the next watch, it's the anticipation or the pursuit. That's what people become addicted to. Now, the best way I can illustrate this, Larry, is if any of your listeners have social media and they have it on their phone, what happens? You scroll down, and then when you get to the bottom, what do? Well, you scroll again. So are we actually hooked on the content we're watching? Probably not. What our brains actually get attached to or wired to is what's next. And so this becomes extremely problematic in the more severe cases of addiction. somebody who's addicted, regardless of what they're addicted to, they begin to plan their days around their hit because they are so obsessed with what's next that it's literally all they can think about. And what this does is it short circuits the brain. So your brain becomes completely focused on what's next. The dopamine hit, it's no longer about acquiring anything. It is simply about pursuing the pleasure and basically constantly experience something new, something novel, or what's next. And so those are the two things that I would say are really major. There's a third one we could talk about if time allows for it, but those are the two big things that are happening when your brain rewires from watching pornography.
Wow. I've never, so as many times as we've talked about porn, I've never heard about the what's next, but that is absolutely true. Because if you really think about it, um, it is that anticipation that
Hmm.
that's all consuming. It's not necessarily the ejaculation. It's like, what am I gonna go see? Like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna find? Like, it just becomes like this. It becomes about the anticipation of the situation and what you're gonna view versus the end result.
Yeah.
So, wow, fascinating. Do you have any statistics by chance of like how like the percentage of married men that watch porn?
I don't. Again, the stats are they're just hard to come by. It's hard
Yeah.
to really get a specific stat that you can trust, and it's for the reasons I mentioned, and it's also that when it comes to surveys, people just aren't willing to volunteer that kind of information because it's so private and personal. Here's some things that we do know. So as a starting point, the porn industry is estimated to amass more annual revenue than the NFL, the MLB, and the NBA combined year
What?
over year.
Are you
Yeah.
serious?
No, legit. Yeah, legit. It's estimated that probably about 35% of all sites online are pornographic in nature in some way, shape, or form. And there's trillions of websites. So you can kind of just imagine how prevalent it really is. As far as viewership goes, it's hard to really place. We know that we know America has the highest viewership on most main porn sites of all the countries in the world. Um, but we don't really know the specifics. Another stat that would be probably worth mentioning is that, again, this is the Dad Edge podcast. My work is exclusively with men, but for every two guys that are watching, there's a woman watching as well. And they deal with an extra layer of shame because this has always been perceived as a guy issue. So that's just an interesting thing that's kind of stemming from it. But regarding marriage, the one stat I do have is that if one person is watching porn in a marriage, the chances of divorce increase by about 56%.
What?
Yeah, so it's dramatic. And the reason is the reason, well, the reason maybe is obvious, but I'll just add an extra layer that you may not think of. If you get conditioned to be aroused by what's next, quote unquote, and that becomes more interesting, then you can only just imagine the excitement of an affair, of if somebody shows interest in you outside of your marriage, they just become very slippery slopes. You start to open a bunch of gates that maybe you're not necessarily walking through, but the point is they're open. And if an opportunity presents itself, a lot of people they have not regulated that part of their lives enough to actually resist the temptation when it comes.
Dang. That's crazy, man. I mean, I'm not surprised now that you say it. I have heard, and I don't know the number, but I've just heard that couples that actually watch porn together, the chances of one of them having an affair is higher. I don't know by how much higher, but I know it's higher.
Yeah.
And dude, that's crazy, man. Wow.
Yeah. Even that one's an interesting one because the reported rates of satisfaction in a relationship are actually higher when a couple starts watching porn. When they start, that's the operative word. And then it starts to plummet as you follow it over long periods of time. And all of it comes back to that first, what we said, the rewiring of the brain. Like you're conditioning yourself to experience arousal apart from your spouse. And that's just never a good situation to be in.
Wow, man. That's crazy. That is crazy. You got me kind of speechless now. I'm thinking about this. This is, I mean, because a lot of moving parts kind of go together.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common pitfalls that men like? So let's just say a guy comes to you and he's like, "Hey, man, like I need some help with this."
Yeah.
Um, what types of things do you hear the most as far as like these bear traps that men get themselves? I wouldn't say get themselves into, but like just situations where this is, you're gonna probably be more prone to look at it, or if you're in this situation or you're doing this or that.
Yeah, so we already talked about one of them, which is doing this alone. That's probably the biggest misnomer in this arena. And the research has showed the addiction research. So I'm broadening it now a little bit, but the addiction research does show that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Mm.
And so really being plugged into communities. That's why I like something like the Dad Edge Alliance is so key, not just to like have your buddies and have some camaraderie, might actually be the thing that saves you from some of this misbehavior. So I think not doing it alone is probably the first mistake guys make. The second mistake, and this is the mistake I made, is we tend to find solutions that deal with the logical part of the issue, which is a very small part of it. So let me illustrate this. When I was 16 years old, I had a couple of responsibilities around the house, one of which was to cut my parents' grass. And they have a pretty big property, so that was at least a couple hours of work, once or twice a month. And I still remember there's this one patch of the grass that was primarily weeds, really scraggly, really ugly looking. And in my head, I always thought, if I ever wanted to clean this up one day, I would put on some garden gloves, I'd get on my knees, and I would, properly uproot these weeds. But I'm a 16-year-old kid. I have a chore to be done, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. So I would just run over the weeds with the lawnmower. And for a couple days, everything looks clean, right? And you almost don't even know the difference from where the weeds are to where the grass is. But we know it's only a matter of time before the weeds grow back thicker and pricklier than ever. And what a lot of people do when they have problematic behavior in their lives is they run over those weeds with a lawnmower. So it's like, oh, I have a hard time controlling the food I eat. So I'm just gonna go on a diet and I'm gonna get rid of all the bad food, which is a great place to start. I'm not against it, but you might need to actually change your relationship with food to have any kind of lasting effect. In this case, in our context, guys install internet filters. They muster up, the willpower and they try to white knuckle it, or they resort to spiritual disciplines or those kinds of things, hoping that if they do more of that stuff, they try to keep busy. That's another really common one. All of it operates under the same mindset, which is that here's the problem. And if I can just try to block myself from accessing the problem, then it'll go away. And what we say is that really true freedom happens underneath the surface. So if somebody really wants to experience lasting freedom from pornography, they really want it out of their lives, they're going to have to do a little bit of dirty work to get underneath the surface and figure out what those roots are that's actually leading to the behavior in the first place. That's the only way you actually have any chance of uprooting the thing long term. So I would say doing it alone and then failing to actually get to the roots of the issues, those are the two most common mistakes that we see guys making.
Fascinating. Let me run this past you because I really want to focus. I really want to ask this question because it's shining a light on focusing on what we want versus what we don't want.
Hmm.
We say all the time in Data Edge Alliance, what we focus on grows and what we focus on expands. And
Hmm.
no pun intended with this topic. And but all kidding aside, I remember in my earlier years and struggling with this, and the more I tried to avoid it and overcome the actual thing, right, porn, the
Yeah.
more I was tempted by it. It's kind of like
Yeah.
food, alcohol. It's like, I can't drink tonight. I can't drink alcohol. And as soon as
Yes.
you start being like, I can't drink alcohol, all the brain really hears is the alcohol. And instead, it's like, I want to wake up tomorrow feeling amazing. Like
Yeah.
once you start focusing on that, so like I'm not going to give a whole lot of detail for the privacy of, my family, but I will say that these conversations have happened, of course, right? If you have teenage boys, and one of the things I have instructed, my boys is like, hey, this is going to be a temptation, right? You're a boy, you're a man. Um,
Yeah.
Instead of trying to fight, tooth and nail to avoid the thing, make a
Hmm.
list of 5 things that you can do instead of. So
Mm.
like I always joke with my community because like I haven't looked at porn and I can't remember when. But I'm
Amazing.
still tempted. And I even tell my boys, I'm like, just because I haven't looked at it in years, that doesn't mean I'm not like, oh, nobody's home. Like, oof, I could really like, I'm really stressed out or this or that. Right. And I have a list of 10 things that I do when I'm tempted by it. And so I always joke with our guys in the alliance. I was like, if you get like one of our free live legendary hats in the mail for absolutely no reason, just know that that was probably what's going on for me. Because I want to do something nice for someone. So maybe it's like I'll leave a note for my kid.
Yeah,
I leave these
cool.
notes actually right here on my desk. It's a postcard of me and one of my boys, and then it's blank on the back, and I'll use these as like notes to
Oh,
stick
that's
in their
awesome.
lunches and stuff like that. But
I love that.
like write them a note. Send my wife flowers, send somebody, one of our Live Legendary hats or shirt or something in the mail just for no reason whatsoever. Or like, even, reach out to one was another like, man, who haven't I spoken to in like
Mm,
months that was like a
mm,
good friend or we talked all the time. I'll just be like, hey man, I haven't talked to you in a while. Like, how are you doing? And a lot of times, man, like all I need, what I notice is like I just need that like 30 seconds of space
yeah.
to just refocus. And I wouldn't say it's not a thought, but it's not as powerful of a thought. What's the whole logic behind psychology behind that?
Yeah, so you're asking like what's the power behind people just focusing on the right things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying I love that approach. That certainly is our approach as well. A lot of accountability systems, quote unquote, are actually just disability management. And what I mean by that is it's like, hey man, I messed up again, had another slip,
Right.
whatever. Whereas if you look at the word, like the way we define accountability, it's giving an account for your ability. And so when people gather in our groups, we always have them answer two questions. How are you doing? Which is where you can talk about like if you fell short or you had a slip, we're not asking you to keep quiet about it because as we talked about earlier, you have to be able to bring this stuff up so that you're not living in the shame of it. But our second question is what are you learning or how are you growing? And that's the part we're much more interested in for the exact reasons you mentioned. If we can get people focused on their growth and their development, even if they just improved 0.5% this last week, to us, that's worth celebrating. And that's how you actually start to compound victories. Nobody got clean beating themselves into some sort of sobriety. You have to be kind to yourself along the way. And if you're not, you might actually be able to be sober for a bit, but you'll never be free. And I think that's an important part is that people are really, yeah, they're focused on the growth elements. They're focused on the person they're becoming. Those are the things that actually drive people forward, where it's not just like, I no longer do the bad behavior, but I've actually uprooted it and something has changed in my heart.
Wow. So an account for your ability.
Yeah, it's right in the word accountability.
That's really cool, man. An account for your ability. All these podcasts, man, you're blowing my mind. All these things I haven't heard, and just a way to reframe things. Um, what type of parameters have you seen work as far as like a structured accountability framework for someone?
So we base everything on what I mentioned earlier, which is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. So we don't have accountability partners in our program. We have something called spotters. And so if anybody's worked out, they know what a spotter is. Because again, this was another kind of fallacy of accountability systems is as like we heard guys say, oh yeah, I had an accountability partner, but he never reached out to me or he was too busy for me. And it was like, well, bro, it wasn't his responsibility. Like you're like he's doing you the favor.
Yeah.
So the reason we use a spotter is because if you have a spotter at the gym, you still do 99% of the lift. It's just that spotter is there for starters, just as a presence in case something does go wrong. They're at least there. And if you do need a little bit of an extra push, sure, they'll give it to you. So that's kind of the way we approach the whole accountability framework and people getting other guys involved. And what we recommend is like a 15, if you have one spotter that you can have a 15-minute call every week, purely with the goal of connecting. It's not about like, hey, did you relapse? Although you can talk through those things if you want, but it's much more about forming meaningful connection. To us, that's the most valuable. And we actually don't create spotters within the program because our program is finite. Our typical client is with us for 4 to 8 months, depending on the longevity of it. But we want people to be free for years. So we actually ask them like, who's in your existing friend circle or in your local communities? What are the relationships you can already add this into? Because that just has a way better chance of long-term success. So that's kind of always been our approach to getting other people involved. I don't think it has to be much, but it's really about that meaningful connection. A satisfied heart rarely wanders. So if you're experiencing meaningful connection on a regular basis, those little deposits add up after a little bit of time. And it's just going to position you better to make better decisions, but hopefully to be able to talk through any of the challenges and struggles you're having along the way as well, so they can reach a resolution.
Very cool, man. You know, let me ask you this. Is anyone ever truly like rid of this? Or I mean like can anyone I think people when it comes to vices, drinking, weed, food even, right?
Yeah.
Um fitness, porn, you know, I don't want to speculate and I don't want to even try to know the answer of the percentages of people that succeed, but to be completely and totally just away from this for like a lifetime is do you see that? Is this a possibility?
Yeah, if you say away from this as in engaging in the behavior, absolutely. I mean, our lives are both evidence of that. At the time of this recording, it's been 7 years for me. February 2016 was my last slip or my last relapse. I think
Wow.
I think the
So
better
wait,
side,
as we
yeah,
record this, like it's like almost your anniversary.
yeah, this is like my anniversary month. Yeah.
Would you like a cake?
Yeah, I would love a cake.
Right.
Yeah.
It would be very, very cool, man. So those of you guys who don't know, I know we're releasing this in March, but yeah, so we're recording right around Valentine's Day. So very
Yeah.
dude, like hang on. Congratulations. That's
Thanks,
huge,
man.
man.
Thank you. And
That's
I know
huge.
if I get a hat and a cake in the mail, I'll know that you were just going through
Dude,
your list.
I'm getting your address. I'm gonna send you some stuff in the mail.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Hey, buddy.
Nothing like it. I recording at home, you get a 7-year old. I love you. I'll come back. Get a 7-year old who will bomb you with a hug with a handful of Funyuns.
Funyuns in hand. Let's
Dude,
go.
yeah, man.
That looks awesome.
It's his favorite snack. Like I don't even know. Those things taste so nasty to me. When he opens up the bag, I'm like, oh my God, like that just smells so bad. But anyway, back to you and back to 7 years. So please keep
Yeah.
going with that.
Yeah, no, that was pretty much the gist of it. I've lost my train of thought now. What were we talking about before that?
Yeah, so just basically, I was just asking, can
Oh,
people actually
yes.
just rid themselves of this completely?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say the behavior 100%. And it's more common than you think. I'll put it this way. Like I think we sometimes we paint this narrative like porn is everywhere. We're getting exposed at younger ages. Our brains are getting rewired. And we stack up all these reasons why it's so difficult. But men are amazing. And when we put our mind to something that like there's very little that can actually get in the way. Obviously, you need some competent guidance. You need a good system. You need a couple checks and balances along the way. Like some things have to fall into place. And for me, it took, oh gosh, dozens of different solutions. I tried a bunch of different things before I really started to gain some traction and figure out what was working for me. So you have to be super kind to yourself along the way. But the one thing I was going to say is this is like to me this season is super fun because on when you're in recovery, like you're really just you're trying to just get some momentum. You're praying to God that like that each day that you succeed continues. And you're not really able to think a lot preventatively of like, okay, now that I'm here, what do I do? But I find that actually some of the best advice I've ever given guys is actually on the preventative side. And I'd love to provide just a couple things with your audience, if that's okay. On these
Please.
are just things that I've learned along the way that I wish I was doing when I was actually pursuing freedom rather than waiting until I got free. So the first thing is you cannot underestimate the power of your routines. And it's amazing if we start to break down the data with our clients on when they do have slips and relapses, almost 90% of the time, it's because they broke out of their regular rhythm or routine. So like I was talking with one guy this last weekend and he's like, man, he's like, it had been, I think it had been a couple of weeks for him, which was really good for him. Cause when he came in with it, he was starting like, I think a daily or maybe even a couple times a day. So he had gone a few weeks and he's like, man, I just came home a little bit late. My mom asked me if I wanted to have a snack. It was like midnight, and he's going through a hard season in his life. So he's like 40 years old. He's living at home with his mom, and he's trying to rekindle the relationship a bit. So he's like, sure, and he eats the snack, and as soon as he eats the food, it just gets his brain into that mode. And so he's back in his room. It's 1 in the morning. He's on his laptop. One thing leads to another. So breaking the routine, that's one thing I would say is I wish I would have been more established in my routines. They're not the thing that fixes you, but they're the scaffolding that you build your success on. And I wish I would have known that. The other thing, and this would be really important for your audience, Larry, confess temptations, not mistakes.
Oh,
So don't wait for something to become a problem. Once you start to kind of just get catch a whiff of it, talk about it. Whether it's with your spotter, it's with your community, your group, your wife, whoever it is, have those conversations. I'll give you a real time example. My wife and I, we live in Jamaica for a couple months of the winter because I'm just fortunate enough to marry a Jamaican,
sounds
and
terrible.
so yeah, it's a tough life. So we're in Jamaica, and on this particular trip, we just the first few weeks we were in Jamaica, we were fighting like cats and dogs, and not we don't fight like super loud and whatever, but like we're just disconnected and we're getting on each other's nerves. We're very irritable. The connection is volatile, and I um I had to go on a work trip to Texas in the middle of this. And so we had a particular date night where I was really excited because I was thinking hopefully I could patch things up a little bit, and then we could at least I could go on this trip leaving on a good foot.
Yeah.
And so the date night went relatively smoothly, and then we got into a disagreement on the back end, and I was like, ah man, I was really frustrated. And I had this thought, which was, I hope I don't have an affair when I go away. Never had that thought before. Totally freaked me out. And I was honestly, I was really caught off guard by it. And not that I've ever even thought about it before. I've never really had any challenges in that area, but the thought came up. I guess my brain was piecing together like, we're disconnected. I'm going to be away. And this is like a bit of a recipe for disaster if a couple of things happen in the wrong direction. So I just knew that I need to confess that temptation before it becomes a mistake. And so the event I was going to, some of my buddies were actually there. So I managed to have a good conversation with them. And when I came back from the trip, I actually had a conversation with my wife about it. And what I found is for guys who are struggling, a lot of them actually maybe their spouse doesn't even know. And you really only have two options, which is that you either confess or you get caught. And the things that you fear of confessing, like, no, I could never tell her because, she's going to leave me. What if I never get to see my kids again? She's going to be super mad. She's already going through a lot of stuff. I don't want to burden her with more difficulties. We have all the reasons in the world. But the greatest things that you fear from confessing something like this are very low percentage of likelihood compared to when you get caught. If you get caught, I can't promise anything. Like things could go bad really quickly, and that's typically what we observe in people who maybe were a little bit too late getting to us. So the best thing you could do is have a proactive mindset and start confessing early and often. And so if a guy has never if you've never opened up, it's time for you to open up. If you're married, I think your spouse needs to know what's going on because you don't want to risk getting caught because the damage would be a lot worse. And if maybe you've gone past those barriers, then your next step would be to confess temptations rather than mistakes. And the more preventative and proactive you can be in these things early on, the more quickly your momentum will build in the recovery process.
So I recap that one more time, and I love how you started that entire segment with that statement and said what we need to do is confess when we're tempted and not to confess when we've fallen down. Did I get that right?
Yeah, confess temptations, not mistakes. Like
Okay.
if we know that temptations are just they're just thoughts, they're just urges, they're just whatever, we have very little to lose by confessing them, but much to gain because we know that without a temptation there would never be a relapse.
Wow.
So that's the proactive mindset that really works wonders. But then I added the relational component because I guess I was just realizing some of your listeners might not even be at that point because they're like, bro, I mean, forget confessing temptations. I haven't even confessed my mistakes yet. And that's why I wanted to touch on that. You can still transfer that mindset into that environment as well.
And this is so cool. How long have you been doing this work for again?
About 4 years full time.
So amazing, man. I just want to pause here for a second. You just seem like one of those people that if I'm struggling with something like this, I honestly get the feeling that I could come to somebody like you and I wouldn't be judged. I wouldn't I would feel very comfortable being like, yo, man, this is what's up. Like,
Yeah.
you know, here's all the dirty laundry. And you would I just I'm not a client of yours, but I just have this intuition that you just would meet me where I'm at and be like, yeah, man, come on in. The water's warm. Like, let me show you what to do here. Uh,
Yeah.
is that pretty accurate?
I think so. I would like to think so for sure. That to me, that's like one of the greatest compliments I could ever get, and that's why I love your stuff on psychological safety because that's something I take pretty seriously. And you can imagine, given the line of our work, for our coaches and just all the people that we have on our team, they have to be really high in that area because otherwise, we're not really doing our job.
Yeah, I agree, man. I think the world right now is in social media is filled with crazy bearded dudes that like to scream at you and give you a verbal beatdown, which don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place for that stuff. Like, and I'm not going to mention any names. Like, I'll go to some people's Instagram, like, man, I just need some fury right now. Right.
Yeah,
And I'll get
yeah,
it and I'll be like, all right, I got it. Cool. And then there are other times when I think you're dealing with something maybe more personal. And I think it's also dependent on like some people gravitate towards that and they're like, hey man, I actually need somebody screaming at me. And there's no judgment. That's just
yeah,
what we do.
yeah.
And there's other people it's just like, I need someone who is just going to meet me where I'm at, not going to get in my face and scream and yell at me and just be like, hey man, like I'll guide you through this. Here we go. So I think that's cool. I want to give you a minute here to share where can men find you, connect with you, and if obviously if they would like to, know more about your services, I want to give you that opportunity.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. I mean, we have a daily podcast called Unleash the Man Within, and that'd be a great place for
Really?
listeners. Yeah, we do it daily. So we do one interview a week, and then sorry, Monday to Friday, every weekday. And then what we do is I take notes in our coaching calls, and basically the questions that my clients ask, I answer them on the air because I know that if they're asking them, our listenership is as well. So that's a great place for people to get started. I do have a book called The Last Relapse, and this actually outlines my system for recovery. And I give it away for free. So it's at thelast relapsebook.com. And that would be another great place for people to, if they want to get some more resources and that kind of thing, that'd be a really good place for them to plug in. So those are probably the two. So if you're a listener of the podcast, if you're a reader, The Last Relapse, you can also buy the book. All the proceeds go to charity in Uganda. So we don't make any money off the book. We try really hard to make sure it's a bit more charitable that way because a lot of people are struggling and we know how rampant this is. So we're trying to just give a lot of, I guess, positive, useful insights in this field. And then I'm really active on Instagram as well. So we probably have 250 to 300 conversations a day on Instagram with people that want help, want their questions answered, all that kind of stuff. So that'd be another place if people want to plug in a little bit more to what we're doing there.
And what's your Instagram handle?
It's Sathiya Me Sam, not the easiest thing to spell, but maybe you can put it in the show notes and people can find us that way.
Got it. And you said me as in M-E or M-I?
Yeah, ME.
M-E. Okay, got it. All right, we'll have it in the show notes for you guys. Not to worry. Gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I did. I love being able to talk about these topics that otherwise are just so taboo and people are terrified of them. But as soon as we start talking about them, that's when we take the power away from these things, at least a little bit, right? To where we can then start to overcome. If you guys want to connect with Sathiya, head on over to thedadedge.com/411 for the show. Wow. You got the 411.
That's
That's pretty
amazing.
cool. Yeah.
That's cool.
Thedadedge.com/411 for the info. Also you'll see in there our link for Bark, which we talked a lot of. You guys know how much I love Bark. We talked a lot about what our eyes see, and of course, you had an experience at at a young age, 11. I had one at 9. My mom never knew, my parents never knew, but Bark is
Yeah.
the app that you can put on your kids' devices so you can monitor, online adult content, along with suicidal ideation, along with drugs, alcohol, cyberbullying, the whole 9 yards. So keeping our kids safe, and that's one way to do it. Sathiya, man, you are doing some amazing work in the world. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Oh, my pleasure, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Back at you, my friend. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.